My friends, by now you have all heard about the drone strike against Moscow. Russian Ministry of Defense claimed 8 drones strike Moscow and they shot down 8 drones. This is, as we all know, garbage, because from the videos already you can count up to 30 drones. And this event is so significant we have to cover it for the second time because more information have surfaced. We now have reactions from major people in Russia and from major people in Europe and Ukraine, and we have a reaction from Putin. What really happened? Who did it? As I said in the previous video, Badalyak came out and say Ukraine doesn't have anything to do with the attack, and I would believe it because it takes away from Ukrainian information operations, because it gives a perfect handle for Putin, who could spin this as an attack against Russian people to mobilize Russian people in this war against Ukraine. But he hasn't done it. That's what surprises me. If I was Putin, I would use this is a gift, I would use this to get my people and mobilize them against one single goal, which is Ukraine. He has dropped the ball, that's how I feel at least. In the previous video I played with the idea of this might have been a Russian false flag operation to mobilize the people, but since his reaction, Putin's reaction, has been so weak, perhaps it's not a false flag. What else talks about against it being a Russian false flag? Well, because Russian Ministry of Defense claimed 8 drones. If it was a false flag operations, they would go crazy and claim 50 drones, 70 drones. They would claim a lot of houses destroyed, a lot of damage done, we need to pay back this. But Russian Ministry of Defense seemed to want to quiet this down and make it as small as possible. They seemed like they're ashamed that they couldn't take these drones down with their air defense, which was the case. Which tells me that this wasn't done by them. Otherwise they would blow it out of proportion, like they do. So if it wasn't the Ukrainians and if it wasn't the Russians, who the hell was it? Well, there's a third option, like the Russian Freedom Legion or the Russian Volunteer Corps fighting under the armed forces of Ukraine, but in Russia as saboteurs or partisans. It might have been a Russian opposition, because these drones that we see from these videos, very weird looking drones flying slow and very loud, almost like Shaheds. They look like they're flying backwards. I've never seen a drone like it. Explosives up to 10 kilograms, so not very major. They look cheap. They look like somebody could have made them, some company could have made them not connected to the armed forces of Ukraine. So this attack could have been done also by a third party. As I said before, Putin can use this to turn Russian people against Ukraine, and now it's up to Ukraine and Russia which side can use this event better in their media and in their info ops. And in this video we're gonna open up how Russia is viewing this, how Russian media is viewing this, and how Ukrainians are viewing this. First of all, what does Putin say? Let's watch. And in the previous video I asked if I should read the subtitles when the language is Ukrainian or Russian, and most of you, majority of you, said yes, read the subtitles. So I'm gonna pause, read. That's all I'm gonna do for all of you who are listening this as a podcast. Thank you for letting me know, I never knew this. We have already talked about the possibility of striking decision-making centers, Putin is saying. Of course, the headquarters of the military intelligence of Ukraine, which was hit 2 or 3 days ago, also belongs to this category.
К этой категории относится и штаб военной разведки Украины, которому был нанесен удар 2-3 дня назад.
In response, the Kiev regime chose the path of intimidation of Russian citizens and strikes on residential buildings. So he's claiming that this strike was Ukrainian and they did it to pay back the Russian strike that happened 3 days ago against Ukrainian army headquarters. Now, Ukraine has never come out with information that Russians successfully strike their headquarters. So Putin is hinting to some kind of a Russian attack that supposedly was extremely successful and this was a Ukrainian payback. Now, this is very unlikely because Putin himself says 2 or 3 days ago. He doesn't even have an idea when this attack was supposed to happen. I mean, it's clear he's just making up such justifications for his own people why it was the Ukrainians. I'm sorry if I don't make any sense here. In my head it makes sense.
В ответ, как известно, киевский режим выбрал другой путь. Путь попыток запугивания России. запугивания граждан России и ударов по жилым зданиям.
Reading subtitles. This, of course, is a clear sign of terrorist activity, but the Moscow air defense system worked normally, satisfactorily, although there is something to work on. My God, what air defense doing? I gotta take my headphones off for this. I saw videos of Russian air defense working around Moscow, and I saw videos of about 10 drones not being destroyed, reaching their targets or falling down and exploding somewhere. Air defense worked normally. So for Putin, 50%, half shoot down rate is okay over Moscow. For me, I think it's incredibly poor, and Kiev has 90%. But it's Russia, it's bardak, it's kashmar, it's all of those words which signify how things are done sloppily in Russia.
Это, конечно, явный признак террористической деятельности. Ну, во-первых, хочу сказать, что система ПВО Москвы сработала штатно, удовлетворительно, хотя есть над чем.
This response, in my eyes, for the Russian people from the president is weak. Dropping the ball, dropping the initiative on information war. You could make this as a much bigger response to it, but this is nothing. How about the international community? How did they react? Because after all, if it is Ukraine, it is attacking Russian soil, Russian capital. The West must have something to say about this. The United Nations came out and said there is no comparison between attacks on Moscow and attacks on Kiev. No comparison as in they're not from the same category. Kiev is being systematically attacked daily, every night, every evening in May. People are terrorized, and this attack was the very first, and perhaps it will not be repeated for some time, so there's no comparison. What is happening against Kiev is much worse. This is the United Nations report, and I agree on it. What about the United States? What do they think of striking Moscow? Well, United States officials have different answers. Some of them say Ukraine should not aggravate the Russian people and not unite them under one banner by attacking the capital, and others say Ukraine have the right. The United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary James cleverly said that Ukraine has every right to project force away from its borders into Russia. And I do agree, especially if it's the Ukrainian weapons, they can do what the hell they want with those weapons. But now the most interesting part. How is the Russian media spinning this? How are they picking up this initiative on the information war? And let's remember, media is controlled by Putin, so whatever they do, that's the Putin's agenda. Reading Russia, 31st of May 2023, Moscow newspaper.
In this morning's Russian papers about the multiple drone attack on the Russian capital, Moskovsky Komsomolets concludes that Moscow is becoming a city on the front line.
Let me stop you right there. Moscow is becoming a city on the front line, so they are frightening the people, over-traumatizing it, because there is no way Moscow is becoming the city of the front line. They're bombarding Kiev every day. Moscow gets one attack and they're the city of the front line. Give me a break.
It's a real possibility now that you'll be woken up in Moscow by a contraption with several kilograms of explosives flying through your window. This will definitely is already having, massive psychological and political consequences. For residents of the Russian capital, the Ukraine conflict is ceasing to be, has already stopped being, just something on their TV screens.
I'm guessing whoever did this attack, that this was the goal of it, to bring this war close to the Muscovites, close to the Muscovite people, especially the elite, where the drones were flying over the elite regions of the city.
Nezavisima Gazeta writes that central Russia, including Moscow, is becoming a battleground in addition to the zone of the special operation in Ukraine. Now, I find this quite interesting in today's Kommersant. Vladimir Putin was at an event yesterday and was asked about the drone attack. And at the end, the person who asked him said, "Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. I'm confident we will achieve our victory." And the journalist adds as a last line, "The most important thing is that at some point we actually figure out what our victory means."
Yes, very well put, actually. Even if Russia loses, if Putin controls the media, they will somehow spin it as a victory. How believable it will be, that's another story.
Komsomolskaya Pravda goes out of its way to turn the drone attack into some kind of Russian victory. The capital dealt successfully with the attack. The main aim of Kiev's drone attack was to spread panic in the Russian capital. It failed. There was no panic or fear.
If you have to stress the fact that there was no panic or fear, I feel like you have to hide something. Because if there was no panic or fear, you don't really gotta put it out there. And from the videos filmed, you can actually hear panic and fear, both of them, a lot of them. So I cannot see it anyway as a victory for Moscow. Only it will be a victory for Moscow if it will unite Moscow people against Ukraine. Then it unfortunately will be a victory for Moscow. Given to them by I don't know who, we don't know.
And it reports the story with this picture. I assume that this is the Russian capital and this is the drone attack.
So yeah, for you who are not watching, there's a huge sleeping bear and a small mosquito, and the bear doesn't really care, so that's the photo they use.
The paper asks various officials and personalities how they think Russia should react to the attack. Various responses, including, we shouldn't react at all, this drone attack was to be expected. We must create a totally new air defence system for a drone war.
That is true, actually.
And we've just got to win.
Just got to win.
RBK, though, has practical advice for what to do in the event of a drone attack. If you're on the street, take cover in a building or hide behind a tree.
Hide behind a tree. That would solve all your problems. But it's certainly interesting to see how the Russian media spins this. And I don't know what to think of this, because they publish opinions here also that is not according to Putin's agenda. That we should not react at all, for example. Igor Kirkin, on the other hand, states this, that media outside of Moscow, so Moscow media spins it one way, and the media outside of Moscow spins it the other way, trying to downplay the attack in every way possible. Less drones, less destruction, didn't really do anything, didn't really change much. Giving another point to the theory that it might not have been the Russian false flag operation, otherwise the whole of Russian media would have been united in condemning Ukraine. But now we will watch Solovyov's reaction. This is the Russia's lead propagandist. Solovyov's reaction to this drone attack. The thing is, in his show, Russian people who are not living in Moscow wrote to him that they are glad that Moscow got attacked, because let's remember, Moscow is incredibly rich. Its standards are European capital standards. Prices are the same, wages are the same. Everything outside of Moscow is kind of poor. It is poor, lower than poor. Far East especially is barely managing in Russia. So they kind of envy Moscow, they don't like that all of the capital goes to Moscow. And now that Moscow's rich got attacked, these other people from Russia are writing to Solovyov that they like it. And this is Solovyov's reaction.
Я вот смотрю, у многих наших комментаторов такая прям...
I see many of our commentators write, here a Muscovite found out that there's a war going on in the country. The reaction is priceless. It's a comment that makes fun about Muscovites.
Вот, москвич сегодня узнал, что в стране идет война, реакция бесценна. Ребят, а чё вы эту хреновню пишете?
And now Solovyov says, why are you writing this bull, you know what? Do you like the fact that there is a strike on Moscow?
Вам что, нравится то, что удар идет по Москве? Вы еще начните
Why don't you start applauding the Ukronazis? Why are you so happy? I love Solovyov reacting to his own people, reacting to Russian people. Russia always sells one people, one country. Единая Россия is like one Russia, Русский народ, one people together. You know, this is not one people together. This is Russian people rejoicing about the strike on the rich.
Нацистам аплодировать. Чего вы так радуетесь? Ах, Рублевка, а там не русские?
On Rublevka, don't Russian people, our compatriots live there? Rublevka is the wealthiest region in Russia, period. It's a Moscow wealthy region, and that was striked with those drones. And now Solovyov is saying, don't Russian people, our compatriots, live in Rublevka? No, they don't. Compatriots, comrades, товарищи, they live modestly, because they're товарищи. In Rublevka live the millionaires, the billionaires, and the elite. So Solovyov is wrong here.
Русские люди живут. Не наши с вами соотечественники. Ах, Москва, а что, все москвичи на...
On Moscow, do all Muscovites drink smoothies and eat falafels? This makes Moscow look like LA or something, you know, bunch of vegan. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend LA people, but I lived there for 3 years. I mean, it's smoothies and falafels all over the place. And And Russian people from the countryside think this about Moscow. I find this hilarious.
Смузи фалафельный? Чего вы так радуетесь? Что вы из себя-то корежите?
What are you so happy about? What are you making of yourselves? Or don't we have a united country, a united people anymore? This is what I'm talking about. This goes against the Russian myth of one people. Now half of Russia don't like Moscow.
Или уже у нас не единая страна, не единый народ? Вам уже, ах, вот, вы с
And now you're saying, here you have it. Be careful with your intonation. Come to your senses a little bit.
интонацией-то поаккуратнее. Вы так чуть-чуть в чувство придите. А то вы все больше начинаете уже...
Because you're starting to work for the Ukrainian psyop more than for your motherland. Ooh, big cards are out.
на ЦЕПСО работать, чем на родину. Так немножко встряхнитесь-ка и приберите вот это свое.
Slava is really hurt. Shake it off a little and cut the serves you right thing. I mean, he's not angry. He's actually hurt and offended.
Так вам и надо. Вот так чуть-чуть свое эго, что не
Okay,
стали
now
звездами,
it
в
went
жопу
bad.
себе засунь.
Shove your egos up so you don't become stars. Think about your country and think about the... Oh my God.
И о стране подумайте.
I'll continue watching these reactions because they are priceless. And again, you watch this video, you see the distinction between Moscow and the rest of Russia. I mean, Moscow is not all of Russia. And Russia is not so united than they want us to see. To sum up the attack on Moscow, I actually have an answer for you. I know who did it. You can see it on this video. It's filmed. Everything is on video. It was done by an incredible drone Zelensky. This tech is new and unknown to the world. It doesn't have an antidote. Russian air defense cannot shoot it down because it's invisible to the radar, it's incredibly fast, and it goes boom boom everywhere. Drone Zelensky did it. If you're watching this from the car and you're not watching the video, then you're missing Drone Zelensky. Here we have the Russian losses of 31st of May. 470 KIAs. As we can see, the Russian KIAs recently are between 400 and 500, almost 1 battalion tactical group per day, which is insanely a lot, considering that they are not striking anywhere actively. Well, this is because Ukraine is very actively striking the Russian rear, penetrating into the Russian rear, as I like to say on this channel, with Storm Shadow, attacking barracks, and these are very KIA heavy, casualty heavy attacks. We're gonna cover the Mariupol attack again because it was so big. We're talking about 100 KIA with one explosion. That is insane. This is where these numbers come from. They're not losing tanks because they're not using tanks. 15 artillery systems, 32 UAVs. Well, in this rate, Russia is going to run out of UAVs by the time Ukraine launches their counteroffensive, and that's the goal. Russia cannot have eyes above if Ukrainian forces are moving below. And 11 vehicles. Again, today I was scrolling through Noel Report Twitter account. I'm sure you all know him. He posts these first-person view drones, racing drones, going incredibly fast and driving into moving Ural trucks and moving BMPs. And kaboom! We don't see the explosions ever because the feed cuts off, of course, because the drone explodes. But there's so many of those videos. Ukrainians have really ramped up the usage of those drones. And I think in a few months, they will replace artillery in a way because the usage of those is so much quicker and so much more precise. In the previous video, we talked about the destruction of Russian barracks in Mariupol with Storm Shadow, but today, again, like the attack on Moscow, a lot more information has come out about it. How big, how grand scale attack it really was. Remember the Ukrainian attack on Russian barracks in December 2022, when Russia lost about 400 KIAs? This is the same scale attack. To illustrate how big of an attack, how big of a boom it was, how carelessly the Russians were smoking in Mariupol, magnetometers in Romania and Bulgaria picked up a seismic activity on this explosion of Mariupol. Storm Shadow missiles. I mean, these missiles have 450 kilograms of explosives. They go boom boom in a very grand way. We haven't actually watched how powerful is Storm Shadow. Let's do it now. Here is a photo of Storm Shadow and all of their capabilities. I'm gonna read for the people who are not watching the video. The Storm Shadow is an Anglo-French development, low observable long-range air-launched cruise missile. So it is launched from a plane. So it is incredibly fast because the starting speed of the missile is already the plane speed, and then it will pick up more speed. Earlier reports indicate that Poland helped Ukrainians adapt to Su-24s to deploy Storm Shadow munitions. So launched from an Su-24. Warhead, 450 kilograms, that is 990 pounds, 1,000 pounds. That is insane. Shahed drones, the Iranian drones, have 45 kilograms and they make a huge boom. I was in Kiev listening to those booms. They were attacking Kiev when I was there in the high-rise tower. Explosions happening all over the city. Huge low explosion. That was only 45 kilograms. If I multiply that with 10, I get Storm Shadow. I cannot imagine the bang. It will do a mushroom cloud, as you could see from the videos. The weapon can strike mobile targets at ranges of 350 miles, 560 kilometers, so extremely long range. It flies at altitudes of less than 100 feet at height. That means very low, 30 meters, 100 feet. Very hard to shoot down, and the attack on Mariupol barracks showed that Russian air defense... I mean, the other guy in the video was saying it all. What air defense doing? Nothing. Playing basketball at the sea. The Storm Shadow's stealth characteristics and low radar signature make it difficult to identify and intercept. It will allow Ukraine to launch deep precision strikes through heavily contested airspace. Russia has no antidote against this weapon, and this weapon is very powerful. Unfortunately very expensive also, but Ukraine uses them only against high-value targets like 500 Russian personnel clustered together in one building. We get 400 VIA wounded and 100 KIAs from this one kaboom. Incredible weapon. And after this strike in Mariupol, it was so powerful and it frightened the Russians so much that now we see Russians moving their heavy armor and light armor away from Mariupol, scattering it all over the place. Because if it is in one place, it will go kaboom. Somebody will smoke carelessly there. Mariupol is not safe. Berdyansk is not safe. Any Ukrainian occupied area is not safe. Now we will watch an interview with one of the most famous Ukrainian journalists, because in this interview he brings out points that are very valid, and all of the Western people, I think, need to see these points. And I'll be reading you the subtitles.
Не просто слова, що навіть якщо війна продовжиться, нам буде допомагати.
There were not just the words that there should be help even if the war continues.
Там ще й досить важливо.
There is also quite an important clause stating that they will be helping us with weapons even after the war is over. This is what the West is saying right now.
Позиція, що коли війна закінчиться, нам будуть допомагати зброєю. Мені здається, що це якраз достатньо небезпечно.
I think this is quite a dangerous signal, because I would prefer to hear that we will be accepted to NATO. Yes, he is right, because the signal that we will give you weapons after the war says that Ukraine will always be fighting and be a buffer state. A signal that you will be accepted into EU and NATO means that Ukraine will be taken as equal after the war.
Безпечний сигнал. Тому що я б волів почути, що нас візьмуть до НАТО.
Then we don't need so much help with the weapon supply.
І тоді нам не потрібно буде так допомагати
If they're in
зброєю.
NATO.
Ми зможемо витрачати на...
We will be able to spend the exact same share of the budget on military as the NATO countries, be under the United States nuclear umbrella and stay certain that war will not come to our land again.
Військовий бюджет рівно стільки, скільки витрачають країни-члени НАТО, і бути під ядерною парасолькою Сполучених Штатів, і залишатися в впевненості, що війна знову не прийде на нашу землю. Нам пропонують інший варіант.
We are being offered another option. Right now, surely we don't see your Euro-Atlantic perspective. You will be moving towards NATO.
От зараз, звичайно, ми не бачимо можливості вашої євроатлантичної перспективи. Будете йти до НАТО, а ми в цей час будемо...
And we will be helping you so you would be so powerful.
Вам допомагати, щоб ви були настільки сильними, щоб якщо Росія на вас
So that if Russia attacks you again, you could fight back. But the whole thing is, yeah, Ukraine could fight back, and the West is sending signals right now that they will support Ukraine fighting Russia, but not actively sending signals that Ukraine will be accepted as equal into NATO and the EU. So that leaves a feeling for the Ukrainians as a buffer state for the EU and NATO.
Ви могли оборонятися знову. Тобто, щоб ви витримали будь-яку
That is so that you could withstand a new war or wars.
нову війну або нові війни. І
The peace warranty in this case is exclusively that Russia will finally understand that it should not attack us.
гарантією мира є в такій ситуації виключно те, що в Росії зрозуміють, що вони не мають на вас нападати.
The story reminds me of the Middle East a lot.
І мені ця історія нагадує Близький Схід. Там теж весь час
The Western countries also always thought that if Israel becomes very strong militarily, all the wars in the Middle East would be over.
західні країни вважали, що якщо Ізраїль буде дуже сильною державою в воєнному плані, то війни на Близькому Сході закінчаться.
Але, як бачимо, це не спрацювало.
Це
And that worked to some degree. By 1977, I think there was a peace treaty with Egypt. Well, no, it didn't work. Israel has been fighting 3 to 4 wars with the Arab League against Egypt, against Palestine, and now it's even tense. I mean, a few weeks ago, about 500-600 rockets were fired into Israel. No, it didn't work.
до певної міри спрацювало. Вже у 77-му році, здається, була мирна угода з Єгиптом. Але до цього довелося прожити 30 років.
Until then, however, the country had to survive 30 years, endure several bloody wars. And he doesn't want this to be the Ukrainian fate. And he sees that the West is kind of doing the same thing, weaponizing Ukraine and supporting the weaponry, but not accepting into the leagues as an equal.
Пережити кілька кровопролитних війн. І в будь-якому разі
And the level of tension at the Middle East remained high now due to the activity of the terrorist organizations.
залишитися на рівні напруженості на Близькому Сході пов'язано вже з діяльністю терористичних організацій. І досі є арабські держави, які
There are still Arab countries that didn't sign a peace treaty with
не
Israel.
заключили мирну угоду з Ізраїлем. Тобто це більш складна ситуація.
This is a more complicated situation, but you know, Russia itself substitutes all of the Middle East and terrorist organizations at the same time. I do agree.
Але, знаєте, Росія сама собою підміняє весь арабський світ і терористів водночас. І тому можна собі
Therefore, one can imagine a situation in which Russia doesn't lead such a large war against Ukraine like it leads today.
уявити ситуацію, в якій Росія, скажімо, не веде таку велику війну проти України, яку вона веде сьогодні, що ця війна колись закінчує.
That this war ends at some point and instead Russia starts destabilizing operations. Well, this has been going on in Ukraine since 2014. Crimea was taken and Russian forces entered Donbass and Luhansk and started a conflict that was frozen for 10 years, but it brought Ukrainian economy down very heavily and stopped them from advancing. Active frozen conflict stops the whole country from advancing. So Russia has this capability, and until West really accepts Ukraine into their group, into their, into the EU and NATO, Russia has the capability to do so. Now a little something funny for you from Belgorod, Russia. The governor of the Russian Belgorod region is now doing an electoral campaign. Yes, Russia is playing the democratic game. I mean, it's not democracy, but they go through the steps and they go through the motions of democracy. So he is giving people the packs of pelmeni, dumplings, Russian dumplings, pelmeni. I really like to eat them. And in return, people who get this pack of pelmeni, which cost about 50 cents, USD or 50 euro cents, they make this video of saying, I am against Satanism, Единая Россия, which is the name of the party to be elected. Единая Россия will be very good, we are all against Satanism. So if you want to know what is the electoral promises of the next elections in Russia, it is, let's beat Satanism for some reason. They don't even know what they're fighting against. In the United States, electoral year is coming and presidential candidates and governors have to spend millions, hundreds of millions on the campaigns altogether. Well, in Russia, you need a few pack of dumplings and you get the people. So votes are cheap in Russia. Now you will see something for the very first time. This is a Russian S-400 anti-air system. Not S-300, but the newer and supposedly very capable S-400. It was visited by Saint HIMARS in the Kherson region, and now it is knocked out cold. The first confirmed knocked out cold S-400 we see in this war, because Russia doesn't really have that many of them. They usually use S-300, which we have seen is good against fighter jets, but does nothing against the drones. The Russian partisans, the Russian Volunteer Legion or Volunteer Corps who entered Belgorod have now given an interview. They say that after those two incursions into Russia, two raids into Russia, They will be doing these raids until they have enough men to go on to Moscow. And they say they have thousands of letters from people who want to join. Because as of now, they are the only Russian entity fighting under the armed forces of Ukraine, fighting against Russia. So people in Russia who don't like Putin, opposition movements, they can join, they will get weapons, and they will be weaponized against the Putin regime. So they have openly said that they want to take Moscow. How insane is that? My friends, I want to thank you for coming back. I'm doing these videos because I believe in Ukrainian victory, I believe in democracy. But I wouldn't be able to do them if I wouldn't have any audience. So thank you for being there, watching and giving my life a little more purpose. I have made you some surprises on my merch store, Ukrainian themed merch that really looks cool and shows your support towards Ukraine. Link is in the description below. Go and have fun. And in the last video I butchered some Patreon names and oh boy, you guys liked it. So we're gonna tongue twist again and tier 10 and above, and I'll be saying your name in a way you will never hear before and after this. Ear bleeding might happen, I'm sorry. Pilepo Inzaghe, Harbo is Ian, Jochen Fitz, Paul Preishauer, Richard Konkepkion, oh it's hard, Richard Konkepkian. Thank you, Mr. Konkepkian. If you want to be like Mr. Konkepkian, become a patron, tier 10 or above, and your ears will bleed. My friends, also go and check out my Twitter. 3 times a day you get most important news happening in Ukraine in a very compact manner. 5 minutes read and you know everything. Also, I have an Instagram where I post everything that I cannot post on Twitter and YouTube. Go and check that out also. Links in the description below. And until my next video, Slava Ukraini.